You started a career path and have been grinding away, maybe all the way to the top. But you've decided the career you've dedicated your life to isn't the career you want to dedicate your life to. Now is just the beginning. Starting out or starting fresh. It's time to become the work experience kid. For me, I only hear about cybersecurity when somebody gets hacked and my data gets leaked, and then I keep getting spam calls from goddamn hackers and scammers and whatever. I really have no desire to work in the industry, but then again, I don't know anything about the industry except for when I complain about having a password that's too long. So let's talk to James Newburrie. Some call him a cybersecurity architect. Some, like me, will prefer to call him a cybersecurity nerd. Does James have the skill to persuade me to join the industry? Do I even have the skills to get on the ground floor? Well, we're going to find out, but I do want to take a hot second to remind you of the guest tab at workexperiencekid.com. If you like the sound of any of the guests on the pod who are up to other stuff outside of their everyday life, you can hire them. Kate Patterson to be a professional fan, for argument's sake. We've also got Matt Dawson as a voiceover artist. And also, if you want to check out James Newburrie, he is amazing on TikTok. He's your next person to go to for fragrances. James Smells Good is his handle. He's also on Instagram. That's enough about me talking about you, James. I want to talk to you now. James, can you briefly tell us what it is you are doing now? What do you actually do?
I am a senior cybersecurity architect for a clean energy company at the moment, but I've been doing IT since the mid-1990s, and I became a security specialist in about 2008.
You've been doing it for a long time. You're from the beginning of cyber security, I guess.
Yeah, longer than it's had a name.
Can you tell us what it is? Like, what's your job description?
That's never been adequately explained to me, if I'm honest. But in reality, my job is to work out how a technology stack could be attacked and work out how we can design ways to make it less likely for an attack to succeed, or how we can mitigate the risk. So there's really sort of three elements to it. The first element is to work out what the risk posture looks like. The second element is to work out what that failure would cost. And the third element is to work out how we can prevent it within budget.
That's a whole lot of things that I just imagine is how can we stop hackers from getting into our computer system?
Well, that's the goal, but there's a lot of work along the way to work out whether or not a game is worth the candle.
Maybe we'll uncover a little bit more about what it is you do, and all the pros and cons and the risk and reward and all that sort of thing as we get through it. So you've been doing cybersecurity and IT since the 90s. Did you always want to be in the IT game?
I was very, very fortunate in that my dad was an electrician, and somewhere when I was about 6 years old, he brought home a Commodore 64. And this was a very old computer in the 80s, for those of you that don't know, who were born well and truly before it. And I think I was about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and I became obsessed with this thing. And I became completely besotted with learning how to program and whatnot, literally before I could tie my own shoes. So I was still in Velcro sneakers, and I learned how to program a computer, and nobody quite knows how that happened. Some people are just born to be computer nerds, and other people work really hard at it. I'm very lucky in that this was the only thing I really cared about as a kid. I wasn't a sporty kid. I was badly bullied. I was very much an introvert. And so I was really just obsessed with this and music. And fortunately, I didn't have any musical talent. So, this is where I wound up.
I remember playing around on possibly a Commodore 64, black screen with green text, very Matrix style, and the only thing I could do was, the little prompt to actually start up, and then had a very primitive version of Paint. And so what were you doing with the computer back then? What were you programming in your Velcro shoes?
I think you're describing a very early Mac, or possibly a ZX Spectrum, but it sounds like a very early Mac is what you're describing. Commodore 64 is plugged into your television, your big CRT television where you'd walk up and turn the dial to change the channel. And I would program in BASIC and get computer magazines which would have the code in them, and I would sit there and type all day to get the game to play. And you pretty quickly learnt when you had a typo and you learnt precision. Other things I would do is we had a cartridge which allowed you to go into and it put cheats into games. That was a really fun piece of technology that my uncle bought me. And we also spent a lot of time playing games together. My dad liked adventure games, you know. One in particular was called The Shard of Innivar. And I would sit with him and we would play it, and it was like, you know, look left, look right, pick up the iceberg lettuce, throw it into the boiling brook, those kind of things. The Commodore 64 came with a lot of user documentation, and I learned how to write my own games, which all sucked. I don't know what happened to the code. It's been lost to time, but I promise you it sucked. And yeah, so that's a rambling answer, I guess.
That's what kids do, right? Kids just play around, and you fall in love with something, and you can't get enough of it. And yeah, it's a shame you also couldn't channel that into music, because I'm sure you'd also be a very amazing musician. But from a kid, you're playing with the Commodore 64, and playing games. How did that progress as you got older? Technology got better, maybe even like through high school.
Well, I think I was born at exactly the right time because if you think about it, I started in personal computing at the start of what was personal computing. There were a few more expensive machines before the Commodore 64, but the Commodore 64 was the first blockbuster. And so I went from the Commodore 64 to the, IBM compatible 386 eventually, and the games were much better. Games like Wolfenstein, Doom is one that everyone remembers that came out a few years later. Then the very early days of the internet, and I was just more and more obsessed with how these computers worked. I didn't really care so much about the games as my driver, as understanding how this thing worked and understanding the magic behind it. And I just got deeper and deeper and deeper into how an operating system worked. And somewhere around, I want to say 9, I went to the library and I got this book out, and it's a very famous book for computer nerds called Compiler Design. And at 9 years old, I'm going through this third year university textbook trying to understand it, and the words just don't make any sense. And I'm sitting there spending more time with the dictionary than I am with my computer at this point, trying to get this stuff to work in my head without the academic rigor behind it. It was really unedifying. But I was just besotted with this technology. And when the internet came along and we were able to chat with people all around the world, I became obsessed with networks and how you connect computers together and how the internet worked. And that led me to become a network engineer eventually. But before I could become a network engineer, I realized that I had to get an entry-level job in the IT industry, and so I went and worked on a help desk. But before that, actually, in high school, for a very short period of time, I went and worked at a computer shop assembling computers for people. And so we would get in the motherboards and the cases, and we would assemble these PCs and ship them off, and away we would go. During high school, I also picked up a TAFE certificate in information technology, and then I went to sit on a help desk for 2 years, and I did my 2 years in hell, as we all call it.
Just the hazing into the IT industry. You have to do the computer support, IT support for a couple of years.
I don't know that it's intentional, but everybody sort of starts there. You go into it and you spend most of your time answering questions from people who refuse to read the screen, and so they wouldn't actually engage with it. And I learned what was happening for these people. They were getting very emotional, and so they were in a very emotional place, and they weren't able to use their prefrontal cortex. They weren't able to engage with it intellectually, so they were unable to read the screen. And really what they wanted was somebody to pull them out of that emotional space and put them into their forehead space where they could think clearly. And so I, having quite a light voice and hopefully quite a cheerful one, if I'm in a good mood, I was able to pull people out of it very quickly. And if I wasn't, I was able to use very dark humor to get them to interrupt that way of thinking and try and come back to me. Lots of complaints, but I generally got them out of trouble.
I don't want to spend too much time on the IT support because we got you as a cybersecurity expert, not a IT help desk person. But how much of it is turn it off and on again? Is that just the thing you have to say? I mean, it always works, doesn't it? But
Yeah, it works less now. Back then it worked pretty much all of the time because what would happen is we were working with far fewer computing resources back then, right? If you consider that your coffee machine probably, well, my coffee machine certainly has more computing power than my first 386 gaming computer. And when you consider that, the typical iPhone in your hand has more power than IBM produced until 2005. In other words, all of the computers that IBM produced. So it's just an incredible amount of computing resources we have now. What would happen back then is, generally speaking, software was not as well written because of those computing constraints. We had less memory, so we couldn't have things clean up as easily. And garbage collection is what would lead to it. So when you rebooted the computer, you would force all of the, you'd basically, like when you go to sleep, very tired, your brain cleans itself up a little bit. You were forcing that within the silicon.
right, fair enough. That makes sense. And well, I have a new computer. Well, new. Actually, it's old. I had it pre-COVID.
Hmm.
PC they call it. Should I ever turn that off? Because I never do.
Provided you keep your software updated, you're not really going to hear from me that much. The biggest concern for, if it's a laptop, the biggest concern is how you treat the battery. If you leave it plugged in all the time, you will destroy it.
Yeah.
If you let it go below 20% charge, you will also destroy the battery pretty quickly. If you keep it between 20 and 80%, your battery will last pretty
Okay,
well.
my battery's going to be dead. And the thing is, I'm never going to know because I never unplug it. Anyway, you're talking about the computing power and how a coffee machine or coffee maker has more computing power than early computers. Well, I'm my coffee maker, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that I have much computing power. So you're not wrong. That was a long way to wind out that joke, but I'm glad it got there. Um, what's your career progression? So you started making computers in high school. You jumped on the 2 years of hell hazing help desk. Run
Hmm.
us through your career up until this point.
Well, I was still incredibly fascinated by networks, right? I was absolutely besotted with networks, and I knew I wanted to be in charge of administering the network, and I wanted to be a network administrator. And so on help desk, I would harass the network administrator all of the time to try and get, tasks and learn stuff from him. And this is kind of how it worked, right? Those that wanted to become programmers would harass the applications team to try and get a little bit of experience, writing some code. But I was an unusual cybersecurity nerd because I did not come from the software side. I came from the network side. Eventually, I got a much better job offer to do network engineering at a company called Nortel. Nortel were the Boeing of the telecommunications industry at the time, and so I got to work on the rollout for Australia's CDMA network, and I got to be what was called the field engineer for that. And that really involved sitting in a car all day with a laptop and a bunch of phones all set to simulate whether or not you were in a building, whether or not you were in a car or on the street, and collect the mapping data. Do you remember the old mobile phone maps you would compare to work out which carrier you needed? So that was part of the work there.
Wow.
Another part of the work was tuning the networks and looking at these maps and going, we should be getting better performance. So we have to adjust our radio waves that much, or how much wattage is coming out there, and so forth. And I learned an incredible amount about radio frequency. From there, I went into, we had a very strange period. We had the Y2K scare, and I went into software testing because it was the only thing that was actually paying. That was where all of the money was going at the time.
And it was
And
never
so
going to happen.
that's untrue. That
Re-
is, if we didn't spend the money, it would have absolutely happened. Yes.
Wow, I thought that was just something that everyone was freaking out about, and because it was just a new thing. Oh no, we've got a 2 and 3 zeros. This is crazy. It was actually going to happen.
It was actually going to happen. The only reason it didn't happen was because we actually spent the money on preventing it from happening. And for the first time ever in humanity's history, we saw a crisis before and we spent a bunch of money on it and we actually solved it. People never realize what they had until it's lost, right? So because you all sat there and lived through a really quiet day, you all think it was a failure, a whole bunch of hype. In reality, what it is the proudest achievement of the information technology industry.
Wow.
and a phenomenal human achievement caused by millions of engineers globally.
Wow, really? That's obviously news to me. I think it's news to everyone. I've seen so many people over the years say that was all made up, but I'm glad to know the asteroid was actually going to hit. It was actually a thing and not just hysteria. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So let me give you a one example of some really clever engineering that was also designed to make sure that nothing bad happened. The Queensland electricity grid was running on, I think it was, somebody went to the library and got historical calendars and worked out, I think it was 1962 or 1968, had the same day and date pattern as the year 2000. And so the plan was to run the entire electricity grid as if it was 1968 or 1960, I can't remember the specifics, and to run it on that date and date pattern to buy us time to re-engineer if things went terribly, terribly wrong. And so there was a test a few months earlier that actually caused a blackout, setting the grid to 1967 to test this theory, and they worked out what the failure was and worked out how to do it without pulling down the grid.
I do remember hearing something around about how the days merge, that was at the 1970 date and 2000.
Yeah, something like that.
You've blown my mind about something that was just the old wives' tale is actually true.
Also, we have another one coming up in 2038, but we've probably already taken care of it.
As in another Y2K situation?
Yeah. So Unix computers, basically every computer now, runs on a different time system to the Windows computers we had back then.
Okay.
And it's called epoch, and it counts the number of seconds since an epoch date. If you have 32 bits to count the seconds, roughly you run out of seconds come 2038. And what we did somewhere around, as a world, just through the natural course of replacing computers, we retired a whole bunch of things. And we went to a 64-bit date, which will give us until the end of the universe. But because we were so resource constrained, those extra bits really added up. And so because we've got so much computing power now, there's no point in upgrading your iPhone now, right? Unless the battery runs out or the software gets particularly better. But there was a point where you upgraded your phone basically every year because the next one was so dramatically better than the last one. We've reached a point of diminishing returns now, as far as our software is.
I never thought I'd be fascinated with IT, but you're doing it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That's a very kind thing to say.
But we have, unfortunately, gone down the garden path of Y2K. So let's jump back onto your career.
Yes. So I was a field engineer at Nortel, had a great time doing that. We were doing all of the Y2K testing, and then there was GST implementation, and once again, all of the money in the industry went towards that. And then the money basically dried up because people thought that Y2K was a wives' tale, and nobody wanted to spend any more money because they spent all of the money in implementing the software for GST. And so the world basically stopped, and I decided that was a very good time to go to university. Now, I already really understood computing, and so I decided to go to business school instead and do a major in IT rather than go to IT school and do a major in business. While I was at UQ, I also had a part-time job as a research assistant. I had a phenomenal time working for the academics, helping them get their studies together, and I became obsessed with organizational psychology. But I realized that I was never going to be great at it, and that in reality, the only thing I was ever going to be great at was being a technologist. So I decided that that's where my future lied, and when I graduated, I entered the graduate program of a company called Xstrata, now called Glencore, and I went up to Mount Isa in Queensland, where I got to work for a man who I believe is a rock star of this industry, a man by the name of John Doran, who was gnarled even back then. He has since passed, unfortunately, but John Doran started work on the first mainframe brought into Australia as a cadet, and he taught me so much about how to be a great practitioner. Not so much about the technical, but how to be a great practitioner. And I am so thankful to have had that opportunity with him.
It's so good that you've been able to jump on board and learn from one of the godfathers of modern day technology.
Yeah, and so John is the one who, and I promise this is very relevant, but John is the one who worked out that I would be a great cybersecurity professional because we didn't have a name for it back then. We just considered it part of system administration. But he identified that I was obsessed with what we call permissions models, which is how you determine whether or not someone can access something. And I was the only person other than him who really understood how they worked and how to structure them efficiently. And once again, remember, we had very few computing resources back then compared to now. And so being able to do this stuff at scale was super important. And because I really love doing things optimally, it really taught me how to maintain massive discipline. Eventually, I left the mining company and I was invited down to Melbourne by a friend of a friend who was starting up a specialist IT security consulting firm. I worked there for a couple of years and then I went and worked for Optus. Now, Optus is a strange company because the brand you're familiar with is the consumer brand. I worked for the business and government services part, which really matters, called Optus Enterprise. And so we had the networks that really matters. We didn't really concern ourselves with the consumer products because they are frankly not as exciting as stuff that really counts. And so I'm in Optus Enterprise and I got an opportunity to work for an amazing man by the name of Ben O'Rourke, who is still there and still doing incredible work. And from there, I went back into contracting when I left Optus. And I've just found another permanent gig now.
That's quite a career, and you've picked up a few qualifications along the way. Let's just skip forward to working in cybersecurity like you are now. Do you think you
Mhm.
need a qualification to do what you're doing?
You need a qualification to certainly get credibility to get in the door. Either you have got a reputation because you started a long time ago and you know us all. We are a relatively small industry, and we basically divide ourselves into two main cliques, maybe three main cliques, right? There are the engineers like me, then there are the more people-centric people who are generally called governance people, and then there are people who are trying to be impressive and do TED Talks. Both of the other groups sort of roll our eyes at them. You can generally tell them because they will talk about things like we need to have a license for doing cybersecurity. Most of this is art. It's not really science because it is about thinking 10 years ahead and working out how somebody could crack this nut in 10 years' time. It's not really about stuff that you can prove like accounting rules. And so people that are trying to sell that kind of qualification, you should be aware of. But the way to get into this industry now, I would suggest, would be to get yourself into a programming track. Go in and learn how to program, get yourself into a software development team, and slowly move your way into cybersecurity from the programming stack. That is probably the most common way in. The other way in is via system administration. Unfortunately, most system administration is now outsourced and offshored, so it's a very difficult road for somebody in Australia to follow to take the path that I took precisely.
Okay, fair enough, but that's very helpful. Some good direction on getting into it. You've obviously loved the IT industry, as you said, since you were a kid, rocking around in Velcro
Velcro
shoes.
shoes. Yeah.
What about it do you love? What do you love about the industry right now?
The thing I love most about this industry is that the purpose of the computer on your desk, it is not there for its own sake. It is there because of what it can do to help you. It is there because it used correctly, it can make you more productive and it can open the world to you. Back when I started, I joined the jihad to put a computer in every home and connect everybody to the internet because, and I swear this is true, I thought that if we connected everybody to the internet and we could all talk to each other, we would eliminate human conflict because we would all be talking and we would all understand each other.
And you know
In
what happened there?
hindsight,
We all went into chat rooms. Every 12-year-old was talking to 18-year-olds who were clearly pedos. And then we all knew that they were pedos. And then we were just baiting them until there's anything went further. And then the pedos were like, hey, I've got this 12-year-old. I've out of luck this time. And that's where it ended. And then MSN happened. And then there was less chat rooms. And then I guess the new version of the internet came and no one was chatting with each other. And now it's just all ChatGPT.
yeah, basically,
How do you see it happening?
when we connected everybody to the internet, I thought we would have everybody getting to understand each other. What I didn't realize was that so few people would have anything interesting to say.
No truer word has been said, which is very unfortunate, isn't it?
Yeah. So what I love about the IT industry is that, okay, we can't do it in a human sense, like on a personal to personal level. But what we can do is we can make the world more efficient. So many things exist now that simply didn't exist. Like even my profession itself did not exist when I was born. It didn't even exist when I left high school. We've built new jobs. We've built new ways of working. We enabled people during the pandemic to literally work from home. Had the pandemic been 5 years earlier, it would have been even worse of a shit show. So all of this, the ability for you to watch Netflix and all of the entertainment you can get at any given time. Right now, I want you to consider this. You can walk into any Officeworks in the country with $200 in your pocket. You can buy an Android tablet and a SIM card and connect yourself to the entirety of human knowledge. This is the most wonderful time to be alive, and it is my industry that has done it. And I am proud of what we've done, and I love being a part of that.
It's a real shame, as you just said. It's a shame that nobody uses it to its potential.
It's not so much that nobody uses it to its potential. It's that, for me, the shame is that they're so incurious. Like, if you're obsessed with anything, like, say you're interested even remotely in Warhammer, you can go and you can watch hours of how to paint these things or how the game works or whatnot, literally for free on YouTube forever. And we're creating situations through government regulation which are going to make cyber attacks way worse, that are going to be terrible for cybersecurity because we are pretending we're wanting to protect children. Let me give you an example. About 4 weeks ago, I joined TikTok, which is a very unusual thing for a cybersecurity nerd to do, but one of my friends wanted me to share my weight loss journey on the internet, and TikTok seemed like the right platform because so few men are talking about being on a weight loss journey. And so I thought this was a reasonable thing to do, and I decided to give it a go. I have earned $1 apparently on TikTok. I don't know how this works, but apparently I've earned $1. I don't care. Give it to charity. I make a really good living. It's unimportant to me. But our friends at the ATO required TikTok to collect my full name, my legal address, my date of birth, and my tax file number. Just consider that for a moment. A Chinese company now has all of the detail they need to completely steal my identity.
Yeah, and when you say a Chinese company, it's really the Chinese government, or the Chinese government has the
Yes.
potential to do that.
And they've done it in service of our government. This age verification program that the eSafety Commissioner is currently doing, this has a simple side effect of eliminating privacy on the internet. Add to that the metadata collection. Everything you do for the past 2 years will be linked to your government ID. Why? I don't know. You're probably a reasonable adult. But why? We're concerned that kids might watch the wrong YouTube channel. No, this is about making enforcement of bad law easier. And what we are doing is we are creating a world where people in poorly run .coms with very few resources will be collecting passport numbers and official government IDs. If you wanted to breach identity on a global scale today, you would not bother hacking a bank. You would not bother trying to scam an individual. You would simply go find the nearest real estate agency and just compromise that, because you would get literally thousands of identities, passports, driving licenses, previous addresses. Everything you need to steal identity is available to you at your local real estate agency, protected by literally nothing.
And that is scary, isn't it? And the fact that I just have a prepaid Optus SIM card and all my information got leaked to those hackers back whenever that happened, and like my frequent flyer number with Qantas just happened to unlock everything else. If for somebody who actually wants to do anything, whether it's the Chinese government or Zuckerberg, because, what's scarier, a government having all your information or a private company, #capitalism. Is there a way to keep up with, like, for just regular people like you and me?
Do you know the irony? Truly the irony? Another example. Your prepaid SIM card required you to hand over a driver's license whenever you got it, right? Australia is the only country in the world that does that. before 9/11, that was not necessary. It was brought in to fight terrorism, and it directly led to the Optus breach.
James, you are so full of facts. I'm all about it.
I have been playing this game for a very long
Oh,
time.
I know you have, and that's and you know the worst part about it is as well is that if you're gonna make a bomb with a phone, there's other ways to do it than a prepaid SIM card, really. Especially,
I haven't researched that. I don't know anything about that.
I assume there is for to protect myself and others. I've never looked this up, but I'm sure there is other ways to do it. And even if you were going to do it, I'm pretty sure having a postpaid SIM is also not going to deter you. Anyway, let's get back onto the cybersecurity life. I want to learn more about you, just real quick. You have so many memories. You've been in the industry for so long. Anything that stand out for you over that time?
Do you remember when I told you about my mentor in the mining company, John Doran? He taught me to be a really great practitioner. One of the most important lessons he ever taught me, and I remember he was so angry with me because I had lost myself in a meeting, and I still occasionally do from time to time. I had lost my temper in a meeting and I got very passionate and I had lost the moral high ground. And he was so disappointed with me, and he took me outside for a cigarette, and we're sitting there smoking under this big weeping willow tree. And he says, James, I know you're right, but do you have to be such a cunt? And I thought to myself, yeah, no, that's a really, important piece of feedback there. It was hard to hear at the time, but in reality, I spend more time than I probably should at this age really questioning myself, okay, how can I be less of a cunt?
Sometimes you just don't realize how bad you're being until someone says, hey, just FYI. You could be a better person in their situations.
He also taught me that people are very rarely fired for incompetence. They're mainly fired for how other people feel about them, and which was part of the same lesson, I guess.
That man full of advice. Love it.
Full of advice. Totally changed my world. I'm very thankful to have got to know him. And the second lesson did not come from a computer nerd, but I think it is one of those things you hear that when I heard it, I went, oh my God, that applies to my profession flawlessly, and I must never forget. And so I will share it with you. I have a friend who is a bit famous, to be honest, and he chooses not to date. He instead chooses to get professional assistance when he feels the need for physical intimacy. And we asked him about this one night, and he said, well, I don't pay them for their skill. I pay them for their silence. And then I realized in that moment that IT security nerds are a lot like rent boys. We are not paid for our skills, although it would be impossible to do what we do without our skills. We are genuinely paid for our silence. We are paid to protect secrets and to ensure that we ourselves can't be breached.
You are so full of advice and some very insightful people in your life. One piece of advice that I have received from guests on this pod is follow your passion. You seem to have followed your passion. How do you feel about that?
God, no, I have not followed my passion at all. I love IT. I love technology. I am really good at technology, but it's not the thing I'm passionate about. The thing I'm passionate about is curiosity and learning and finding out about the world around me. You should never follow your passion, because if you turn your passion into work, the thing you love will slowly die. What you need to do is you need to find out what you're good at and what has commercial value. And then you need to follow that. And it needs to be something that you enjoy, that you find stimulating, that you find fun, that you find people who inspire you. But your passion should remain for the weekends, lest you kill it. We tell people to follow their passion, so they go get degrees in ancient history with no job and thousands of dollars of debt. We give people terrible advice when we tell them to follow their passion. Don't do it. Very few people are passionate about collecting garbage bins, but those garbage bins have actual cash associated with them. Work out what you can do that will inspire you to get up in the morning, but has commercial value. and do that and do it epically.
There are the two sides of the coin there. Follow your passion, yeah, that's great. As you say, there's a limit to that. And, if you can, if there's a Venn diagram and you can find that little spot, I mean, that's good.
My passion is truly music, right? My passion is music, and I did not have any musical ability. However, by showing up every day and committing to being the best computer nerd I could be, I have discovered something more valuable than passion, a genuine love for this. I am so incredibly lucky to spend my day doing something I genuinely love. The way I see it, I was raised to be a computer nerd. Most people who loved music would have found their way into the conservatory, and then they would have, been competing with people 10, 15 times better than them. I picked the thing I was good at, and it has served me so well, and I enjoy it so deeply that I fell in love with it as an adult.
Those musicians could end up fading away. They want to be as part of an orchestra or something, and then they're just spending their Saturday nights playing to an empty pub, and that would easily kill your dream.
I don't enjoy Paul Kelly's music, right? How depressing would it be to play How to Play Gravy to an empty pub because it's on the set list? I'm not saying that everybody in the empty pub may like or dislike Paul Kelly, but I find him to be overrated. But that's neither here nor there.
I'm also not a fan of the Gravy, so I don't get it. Anyway,
yeah.
We've spoken about some stand-up memories. You've given us some good advice. I want to know some failures. Do you have a spectacular failure that you can share with me?
Oh, yeah. 150 years ago, I I once again caused a system outage. I wasn't really paying that much attention, and I was working remotely. Like the thing I was changing was very remote. And I issued commands that basically took it offline and took a whole bunch of the network offline, and it was in a remote country town. And this crashed a bit of a bank, which was a little bit unfortunate. And, that branch couldn't really reopen until we managed to get an engineer out there to on site to fix my stuff up. That's probably the most spectacular one. What I learned from that is to use a technology called commit confirmed, where these things will restart with their old configuration after about 10 minutes if you don't give it a second command after you make the change. So
if you go, shit, I did the wrong thing here, you don't touch it.
It goes back to where it was, yeah. That's probably the most valuable thing that I learned from that experience. And I'm pretty sure that I've made many stuff-ups in my time that were equally spectacular or perhaps more spectacular, but that one was the one that I was most upset about because it was such a rookie error and I should have known better. But once again, John Doran, he told me that I could stuff up anything, absolutely any system, provided I didn't affect payroll or the commute, because we had people flying in and out of mines, provided they could get home to their families and they could get paid, it was fine. I've always adopted the view that provided I don't stuff up payroll or the commute, we will be okay.
People usually say we're not saving babies, we're not saving lives, but I reckon the payroll and the commute, people get over dead kids, but they don't get over their not getting paid for a weekend.
So I work in the electricity industry now, and before that I was in telco, and I was so thrilled to work in those industries because they had real stakes. If you think about it, you cannot run an electricity grid without its telecommunications infrastructure, and you can't run the world without electricity. And I love that feeling of having actual stakes. It's not for everybody. I also love the ability to do it at scale, to do my art at scale, because one small change has massive implications. And I love that feeling of achievement at the end of the day. But what I think people forget is that all of these systems exist so that you can go home to your baby, so that you can go home to your dog, and you need your money so you can buy the dog food or cat food or live your life. All of your money now is electronic. I'm a very old-fashioned man. I carry a few $100s in my wallet, but I was shocked to discover one day when the FPOS network went down that I was one of the few people in the office who actually carried money, because I was one of the few people in the office who was able to buy a coffee. And that shocked me, that people who should know better and how fragile all of this is just relied on it as if it was granted. They knew what it took to keep up. We may not be saving babies or doing missile defense here, but we are your way of life.
So you are saving babies in a roundabout way.
I don't know about that,
Yeah, we'll,
but
we'll say you are. I'll give you the credit. You're saving babies. You've told me a lot about what you love about the industry. Can you tell me what you don't like about cybersecurity?
a lot of people think it's easy. A lot of senior management in a lot of companies don't understand that if they engage cybersecurity earlier, we could probably save them a lot of money in developing their assets and developing their systems. And so a lot of times, senior leaderships in organizations see IT as a cost center. They don't understand that it actually enables massive profit and massive efficiency if they invest in it. But like anything, they need to invest in it. It is product development. It is not a cost center. And sometimes we are seen as a way to cut costs. And so what tends to happen is people will say, we must sweat the asset. We have to extend the life of this thing. And then you wind up in a situation like banks are running on code from the 1950s, which is genuinely terrifying because they can't move forward. Centrelink, it is going to cost billions of dollars to update Centrelink's IT technology because it's stuck in the 90s because people were sweating the assets.
Really? I shouldn't be surprised that this is how a government organisation is run.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is that technology is seen as a cost by senior leadership of many organizations, and it is expensive, but price is what you pay and value is what you get. And there is nothing in the modern world which has done more for productivity than technology.
If you're in a position of power where you can fund IT and fund your cybersecurity organisation, definitely do it because you don't want to be like a bank and you're relying on one bit of code from the 50s. That's ridiculous.
It's insane.
James, your stories, your passion, or maybe we shouldn't call it passion, but your stories and your enthusiasm for the cybersecurity industry have kind of piqued my interest a little bit. So I do want to hear a little bit more, specifically to see if I actually want to enter the industry. But I want to take a moment to thank you, firstly, for being a guest. And I want to encourage anyone listening to help me find more guests for this pod. I really enjoy learning about different people and different careers, and I want to speak to more people. James was recommended to me by Matt Dawson, the voiceover guy, in the previous episode. And if you enjoyed the episode with Megan Butler, international airline pilot, she was introduced to me through a listener. I would love to talk to more people, so I'd love your help. Visit the website workexperiencekid.com if you've got somebody in mind, or slip into my DMs. Getting back into my life as a cybersecurity nerd, maybe if I have the skills or the desire, I think you might be able to entice me by telling me a little bit more about what your job is day to day. And obviously there's some elements of it that you can't talk about because of it would defeat the purpose of the security part of cybersecurity. But what does a typical day or even a week look like in your role?
I'm working for a very new organization, so there's a lot of stuff that we're planning to do ahead of time so that we have what we call the cybersecurity roadmap, which is a list of projects and initiatives we'll take to build out certain systems so that we're able to have really good alerting and really good visibility of what will happen. There's a lot of negotiation around what policy looks like, what a reasonable password length is, whether or not we will annoy people with two-factor authentication, discussing what budgets look like for those initiatives, what kind of engineers we need to deliver certain projects. And what I like to do differently to a lot of cybersecurity specialists is I don't like to talk to management about cybersecurity at all. I like to talk to them about their business and what they want their business to do and what kind of business we want to be so that I can plan that and how to do that safely.
Okay, I could possibly have a conversation about what the goals are, but I just don't have the chops for it. But that's obviously something I have to learn.
Yeah, so a typical day for an entry-level cybersecurity person, it's probably easier to understand. The day normally starts with checking that the backups ran because that's the most vital job in the entire IT department.
So that's like making
All
sure
of
the server has been backed up overnight or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the most important job of any IT department. Then every year or so, we will generally run what we call a restore test, where we try and rebuild a server from backup and hopefully fail so that we learn from our failure. So the next test we get better at it and we're able to actually restore services from backups. This is perhaps the most important job in IT. Cybersecurity itself has three main objectives, and the simplest way to think about it is what we call the CIA triangle. We are trying to ensure the confidentiality of your data, the integrity of your data, and the availability of your systems. And we need all three of them for a system to be considered secure. So a lot of our time is looking at a situation, like somebody wants to run a project and they will say, we want to implement this software, or we want to work with this supplier, and the job will be to do what we call an external party risk assessment, or some people will call it a third party risk assessment, where they will ask lots of questions of this potential supplier, like, have you been hacked? Do you have some certifications which indicate that you are secure? Have you been audited? How do you intend to connect to our systems? Are your people appropriately screened with appropriate background checks? So the third-party risk assessments happen quite commonly as a relatively junior, like that's something that relatively junior practitioners will tend to spend a lot of their time on because it's important work and very detail-oriented, but it's something that has fewer technical skill requirements. Then there will be what I like to do at the senior level. I like to say that my job is to, like any good queen, advise, guide, and warn. So I advise people on how to achieve their business outcomes effectively and cheaply and safely. I guide projects towards delivering those outcomes and being in line with our policies. And I warn when things are off the rails. And that involves risk registers and getting the business to understand how much money is at risk if there was a breach, or how much money it would cost to resolve a problem.
And the money is obviously all that the people making decisions really care about.
Well, I mean, they do care about their reputations, and most organizations genuinely care about the safety of their people and their customers.
Oh, that's nice.
But at the end of the day, we're all constrained by the almighty dollar, right? We all have resource limitations and priorities, and some things will cost millions of dollars to fix for a $50 risk, and that's not very sensible. So if you consider Qantas, right, if you took the actual specific risk framework in Australia, the Australian Centre for Risk, you would never allow a plane to take off because the consequence of that plane falling out of the sky is so incredibly dire. There is no way to mitigate it. But if we applied the rules as they're written, we would not have aviation. So sometimes you've got to look at it and go, okay, this could happen. There is a non-zero chance of this happening. It's a disaster if it does happen, but do we let the plane take off or do we just sit on the ground?
Have to have some risk, otherwise you have no reward. Can you tell me who you're working with day to day? We've got, I guess, other people in your team. You've got decision makers, the higher ups, and so on. And I guess you've got all of the worker bees at a common level who get annoyed at your two-factor authentication. Who are you working with?
My normal day starts with a daily operations meeting. It's a quick conversation with the operations team, make sure that all of our systems are operational. Before I have gone to work, I've woken up, I've gone for my morning swim or whatever it might be gym that day. I've opened my laptop as I'm drinking my cup of coffee and I look at Reddit and I read NetSec so that I'm across every new breach that happened while I was asleep. Then I will make my way to the office. I will talk to my operations team. I'll see that the backups ran appropriately. Then the next thing that I will do as a general rule of thumb is I will look at the monitoring system and just make sure that everything feels right. That's just a habit that's not necessary at my level now, but it's a reasonable habit, I guess. And then I'll get into meetings. Those meetings will be either other technologists who are designing systems, and we will talk about how their designs can be inherently more secure. So think about that as fail safe, the idea that if there's a failure, it will unlikely to lead to a breach. Then I spend a lot of time talking to lawyers about what do the regulations look like? Have there been any regulation changes? How does this regulation interact with this requirement or this proposal? In the energy industry, we have a thing called the SOCI Act, or the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. And we also have a thing called the Australian Energy Sector Cybersecurity Framework. In total, these represent about 2,000 requirements that we have to meet as an energy company. And those 2,000 requirements make their way down to the software level eventually. And my job is to map those requirements to very specific things like you will have two-factor authentication because we're meeting requirement number 358.
I'm increasingly finding myself way out of my depth in terms of working in cybersecurity, but I'm all about hearing your story. What is the most challenging part? Everything sounds challenging to me so far from what you're saying.
The most challenging part of my day is actually a personal problem, and it's not anything to do with any of the technical skill. The most challenging part of my day is when you sit there and you have to explain that we have a requirement to deliver this because of a piece of regulation, or it's just the smart way to do it, and somebody is caught on their requirement set and there's no clear way to resolve that conflict. Building the process which you can both agree to get that resolved can be really challenging in a lot of organizations. I think in all organizations there is a natural tension between people who want to get a specific thing done and people who are seen as slowing that down. Sometimes if you move more slowly, you actually deliver more quickly because you've thought it through, right? And I think that there's a natural tendency to say something like, we just need a spreadsheet. And in reality, that could be an incredibly silly way to do something.
The just need a spreadsheet, there's usually a whole lot of effort that goes into it. Just to digress ever so slightly, when we were doing the trial episode with Brian Riley, graphic design unicorn, visual design unicorn, he gets clients asking him to just design a logo. And they just go, oh, isn't it just a picture and some words? And it's like, no, there's a whole lot more that goes into that. So that's a sort of resonated with me by people who say, oh, just give me a spreadsheet or just give me this. How hard can it be? And it's like, well, actually, we have to do all these tests. We've got all these regulations that we need to adhere to. It's not just anything.
Yeah, the semiotics of a logo design, right? Where it's like, what do you want the logo to say subconsciously? Well, if you think about every system in your world, there is embedded risk and embedded requirements in there, and you either do it well or you do it poorly. And the thing that keeps me up at night is not the new stuff. The thing that really keeps me up at night is the stuff that's 20, 30 years old that's sort of rotting in the background that the business can't get rid of because it's what's called a legacy system and they're relying on it. And rather than re-engineer it into a modern technology stack, which we would be able to keep up to date very easily, a lot of big corporations are caught in this legacy trap where they're sweating those assets, and every day more and more vulnerabilities are becoming discovered. And how do you keep those safe is very challenging. And people also want to trade off convenience for security. So we can secure basically anything, but it will become very difficult to use that system. The more convenient something is, the less secure it generally is.
And I guess we see that with people in offices saying, why would they want to hack me? It's not necessarily why they're trying to hack you. They're trying to get into the system through you and try and find a password, or just you being lazy as the individual, so then they can use your email address to send off a PDF, which is then infected with the virus or whatever. And then that's the reason why you've got these long passwords. But it's quite inconvenient as a staff member to have to log into a computer every time and remember this ridiculous long password. But it has to happen to keep the system secure.
You want to see me absolutely lose my shit? When I've got something urgent to do and I have to reset my password, I become very grumpy. I also share these frustrations with everybody. Like, it's just completely understandable. We want this to be as light touch as possible. We really, really do. The days of cybersecurity saying no to people really went away in our very early days because we worked out that we would wind up with something called shadow IT. Shadow IT is when, well, I'll give you an example from the mining company that I worked for 1 billion years ago. The mining company decided that it did not want to have Wi-Fi at that point because Wi-Fi did not have any security on it. And we were concerned that foreign government-owned entities would want to hack us so that they would work out our cost of production, which would give them a commercial advantage at negotiation time when we tried to sell them minerals. So there was an actual threat, and the decision was made that there would be no Wi-Fi until we could secure it properly. And so in the meantime, people would plug their laptops into those old blue cables. And nobody wanted this because it was a pain in the wazoo when you could just go down to Harvey Norman and buy a Wi-Fi access point. So I spend a lot of my time, because of my radio frequency knowledge, I built a directional yogi antenna for the more technically minded people in your audience, and I would go around the mining lease, and I would sweep every now and then trying to find rogue access points. And what would happen? Engineers generally would do this. An engineer with a corporate credit card is the most dangerous thing you've got if they've been told no, because what they will do is they will go down to Harvey Norman and they will buy the access point and they will plug it in. I mean, now we've got some controls which we can add to networks to stop this, but they would plug in this thing and they would effectively not have any security at all on it. It would just be completely open, completely defeating the purpose of the ban. So what I learned from that is that the most useless thing you can say is no. The smartest thing you can say is this is how you do it safely.
That's some good advice in general, even for teenagers who like chroming in a park. You shouldn't do it, but here's how you do it safely. Anyway.
I don't know if there's a way to chrome safely. I'll leave that to others to tell me.
You know what? That's probably a very bad analogy.
Sometimes you're looking for harm minimization. So we call this mitigation. How do we mitigate the risk? So there are times when risks are unavoidable, and it's like, what can we do to make that risk manageable?
That's something for us all to keep in mind when we have to update our password and get super snippy at the IT department.
Yes.
This is a no-brainer question. The question is, do you think your job / the industry has a strong future? I'm going to say the answer is yes. But what does the future of cybersecurity look like when it comes to like IT, quantum computing, so on and so forth?
Most people, when they ask me that question, they ask about artificial intelligence. And truthfully, artificial intelligence does not keep me up at night. I'm not worried about artificial intelligence because I have more faith in natural stupidity than artificial intelligence. Intelligence requires understanding, and the way the current AI we have works, it does not have comprehension. It can only effectively use a thing called Bayesian statistics to predict the next word. And it can do this very quickly, but it is bullshitting at scale. So it's literally bullshitting its way through every answer. Once you realize that, you become less concerned about AI. Now, bullshit is often really handy because you can do so much with bullshit. Like, once again, we just look at Canberra and there we are. But the takeaway here is that quantum computing is way scarier for cybersecurity than artificial intelligence. And here is why.
Can I butt in? Can you please maybe give a quick overview of what quantum computing is for people who don't necessarily know about it? Might have heard about it, but don't know too much about it.
Yeah. Okay, so a classical computer, the computer in front of you right now, uses binary to do basically maths. And here's a little bit of trivia for you about classical computers. They can only add numbers. Everything you see in front of you, from your video game to the most sophisticated particle modeling we have in the world, all at the silicon level breaks down to adding numbers and comparing if two numbers are the same. The rest is all just built from those two mathematical operations, and that's all a classical computer can do. When you talk about a quantum computer, it is able to use effectively partial values instead of 0 and 1. And so you've moved away from binary to a situation where you can effectively have infinite values at the same time. Now, this is very abstract, but the takeaway is that you can say right now as a human, I reckon there's probably a 50-50 chance of me flipping this coin and getting heads. Or there's a 70-30 chance there's going to be rain tomorrow. You know, you were able to think probabilistically. My partner will probably be pissed off if I have another 3 pints at the pub with the boys. Imagine a world where a computer is able to think probabilistically, where it's able to look at a whole bunch of numbers and say, I think it's probably in this range, and now I can calculate it in that range, instead of having to do the same operation over and over and over and over millions and millions and millions of times to get that range, where it's able to process that range as a range. I'm probably not making this clear, but what quantum computing does very differently to classical computing is that computers no longer have to break everything down to just adding numbers and checking if the result is the same number and doing it billions and billions of times. So to break a current crypto key, the AES 256 crypto key, would take longer than the universe has existed and is expected to exist using classical computing, even if we took all of the computing power on Earth and applied it to this problem. In a world where you're able to factor numbers using quantum computing, that can happen instantly.
Wow. I've heard good things about quantum computing, or like, the basic overview, but I didn't realize it was going to be, or it is, so effective.
It is a game changer for specific problems, but it will not make your video game graphics any better.
Thanks so much for that. Now, you were saying that quantum computing is way scarier for cybersecurity. So, why is that?
Today, the most well-resourced organization will have a few $1 million for cybersecurity, maybe at best. If you're talking the Department of Defense, maybe there's a few dozen $1 million. But when you consider the threat environment, you've got everything from bored school kids who are at home on school holidays, who are talented and not directed to anything useful. Then you've got state actors, you've got advanced persistent threats, you've got organized crime. So effectively, no matter how much money you've got, there is basically an infinite pool of resources targeting you at any given time. AI does not, in fact, change this. All it does is it makes the school kid more likely to succeed, but the reality is that the state actor was just as likely as the school kid is now. So if they were going to get in, they were going to get in anyway. So AI does not bother me. Quantum computing bothers me because of the way everything works. We base a lot of stuff on maths, particularly the RSA algorithm. Fundamentally, quantum computers can crack the crypto keys in a very trivial way. And we do not today have very many algorithms which are resistant to that. There are approximately 5 algorithms currently being investigated and proposed as standards to help with a quantum resistant future. However, one of them has already been cracked by classical computers, the kind of laptop you've got in front of you. The other 4 are still being investigated and are very promising. But there is a day where quantum computing effectively breaks every single crypto key. And in a world without cryptography, we cannot deliver anything. We cannot deliver confidentiality. We cannot deliver integrity. We cannot deliver non-repudiation. We cannot deliver anything to prove the digital records are correct. So quantum computing is the biggest challenge we face. It's also the best opportunity we face, because if we can develop quantum resistant algorithms, we will find ourselves in a situation where, provided our regulatory environment permits it, we may reach a point where systems can become unhackable in about 100 and 200 years.
Okay, well, we'll be long dead before them, so wish us luck. How long do you think it might take for quantum computing to be, an everyday thing?
I don't think it will ever be the kind of thing you have in your home. What quantum computing effectively does is it permits a machine to think in probabilistic ways rather than classical ways. Now, we basically do that now with very fast processing. I don't see much need for it in your home. Where it is very practical will be in cloud computing environments. And I have a friend who is a quantum computing researcher, and he says in the order of 10 to 15 years. So we've got some time here, but I don't think we've got time to waste.
Because I was hoping this would be an answer where, We're worried about AI taking over and it being the matrix. But hopefully, when that time happens, we'll all be dead and it doesn't matter. But quantum and the security issues and just the pain that's going to cause, especially in the hands of some bad actors, 15 years is not too far away.
To go back to the beginning of our conversation, we need to discover the quantum resistant cipher kind of now, and then we need to do Y2K to backfit it to everything. And it will be bigger than Y2K because we only had one clock on every system, whereas there are multiple crypto libraries on every device now. Everything from your iPhone to your Wi-Fi scales to your smart light globes, all of it is relying on AES 256 or lower versions of AES. And that cipher will be broken trivially.
You're going to figure this out one day, James.
Maybe. I don't know. It depends how much red wine I drink.
I'm already scared off from your job in this industry, but for somebody who wants to essentially become you, what advice might you give that person starting off today?
I would advise them that the most valuable skill I have is not my technical ability to think about how to do a crypto key or how to do a certificate management or how to do anything particularly technical. My most valuable skill is my ability to do an exercise called problem devolution, which is breaking problems down into smaller and smaller and smaller components so that I can solve a whole bunch of small problems rather than one large problem. Problem devolution is the most valuable skill I have, followed by being able to talk about why this is important to the business and how that relates to why I want this resource.
Two good skills. The problem devolution is a good one for even as like goal setting in general. Like you want to be good at X, Y, or Z. What steps do you have to take to get there? So that's great. And just being able to explain what and why and say it in a way and communicate it in a way that the person you're essentially trying to influence, how it's going to benefit them, X, Y, Z. Would you do anything differently if you were starting again? I mean, you were coming up at a really important time, but also very fortunate time.
The things that I would do differently are probably things that we all would have done differently, right? Like I would have been more serious and less frivolous at 20 or whatever, right? But basically, a lesser known requirement to be a cybersecurity nerd is that if you find yourself moving towards government, the background checks can become very intense. And depending on the agency you wind up at, this can involve things like proving where you've lived for up to 15 years and having paperwork that proves that you've lived at each of those addresses, having very clear records of your financial records, and like some clearances require some very invasive questioning of your personal life. So making sure you've got very clear documentation filed away would be something perhaps you've not thought of. If you're looking at your life going, I think I want to become a cybersecurity nerd, my advice would be to assume you're going to wind up in government somehow and be ready to have the records to show the clearance agency.
I'm no good there. I might be able to prove where I lived over the past 10 years. I've lived in like 12 houses, and I know that one number was 147. I can't remember what unit that was. I can't remember what street it was. But anyway, someone who's going to steal my identity one day can figure that out. Anyway, what skills or traits does a good cybersecurity nerd have?
Deep curiosity about not just cybersecurity, but about the thing they're trying to protect. And they will also have the ability to think ahead to avoid problems rather than try to address them after they have appeared.
And what would you ask somebody who wants to become you to see if they should become a cybersecurity expert / nerd?
Back when I was in charge of hiring for entry-level positions, one of the questions I would ask potential hires, and I didn't really care about the answer, but I wanted to see the thought process behind it, was which is better, the Xbox 360 or the PlayStation 3? And what I was looking for from that was a deep curiosity about technology. Did they understand that the chips were built in different ways? Did they understand that they ran different software? Did they understand that they had a different approach to solving the same problems? Now, they could argue either platform was better than the other, but what I was looking for was the quality of the argument and that it was backed up by the thought process. The most important thing you can find in a hire is aptitude, and this next most important thing is attitude. If you can find somebody who has the knack and they're a good hang, they will be a great cybersecurity nerd.
I unfortunately will fail your test because I know nothing about either of those consoles.
I would need to update it now, to be fair.
But I still know nothing. I've got an Xbox that I only bought because it came with the TV. You know, one of those ones where the TV is going to be reduced, but we're going to throw in an Xbox for an extra $500, and it's like, okay, well, that actually works out
Well,
good.
yeah.
And I just use it as a DVD player, so that's pretty much my Xbox time. At the moment, there are around 2,000 jobs advertised on a job advertising platform that I won't mention unless they sponsor the pod. I typed in cybersecurity, and it came up with everything, you know, from your IT consultant help desk thing, I guess, through to you and your level. Do you think that someone who's not able to get a job in the industry will be able to get a job? I feel like there's a whole lot of demand, and as long as you have a little bit of chops about you and ideally some sort of qualification, you would be able to get one of those jobs?
A lot of the jobs that are advertised are either duplicates. So one of the problems we have is that recruiting agencies will often advertise the same job. So, you know, bobsrecruiter.com versus Talent International versus Manpower or whatever, right? They will all put an ad on the job board, but in reality, they're recruiting for the same position. And so it's very hard to filter out how many jobs are really available in this industry, in this specialty. The other thing is that there has been over the past 20 years, a reduction in all corporates in all walks of life, a reduction of training budget. So we want somebody who has demonstrated experience with this technology stack specifically. We don't want to spend time training them or resources training them on our technology stack, even though they might have been in a very similar technology stack in a different organization. And so the nature of modern corporate life can sometimes make it hard for people to get a go. But once they get a go and start to prove they've got a couple of years behind them, it becomes a lot easier to get a go.
So this strikes me as one of those, you need experience to get experience, but you can't get in the door without experience.
I would not try to start a career in cybersecurity within the cybersecurity specialty. I would suggest to you the easiest way to move forward to get into a cybersecurity career would either be to go via an organization like the ADF and spend some time in that kind of world, or alternatively to spend some time in the software development world and move into cybersecurity from being a software developer.
Or the other option, I think more entry pathway from movies in the 90s, become a hacker, be really good at it, and then get snapped up by a company.
Honestly, only know of one Australian, and I don't think he was particularly great hacker because he got caught. I only know of one Australian who had a provable history as a black hat hacker who now works as a white hat.
Okay, maybe we just avoid that whole pathway just for sake of streamline and ease.
I think it would be very challenging to even pass a standard criminal check.
That's an issue, isn't it? I'd like to ask a question about how one can improve themselves. For example, with Brian, our visual design unicorn, I asked if there's someone on, say, Instagram that he follows. I imagine it's quite a hard one to follow one particular person, but are there any publications that somebody who wants to get into cybersecurity should consume to improve themselves, their knowledge, and help them develop as they get into this new career?
I'm going to suggest a couple of podcasts that really might help people. The first one is Cybersecurity Simplified. I would suggest this for those who don't really want to get down in the weeds, but are cybersecurity curious. That podcast is really good at explaining cybersecurity in a really straightforward way, and it's a really great way to start learning the concepts. If you like a more true crime style of podcast. The Darknet Diaries is a great example. It's very much they focus on one particular cybercrime a month, and then they go into it like any true crime podcast. It can be a really gripping listen. Security Now is the oldest cybersecurity podcast, and it's really worth listening to. And Smashing Security is a really good conversational podcast where they get experts on and they talk about a particular thing in detail, depending on what the thing is. I keep track of things like NetSet on Reddit, and in every capital city in the country, we will have a last day of the month club. In Melbourne, it's last Tuesday of the month club, where I don't get to as many as I would like, but at the last Tuesday of every month, there's a bunch of cybersecurity nerds go and meet up and have a drink.
That is a very comprehensive list, and thank you so much for sharing that list. I have to say that I'm going to have to strike off cybersecurity nerd from the list of careers for me to try, just because you've given me so much information, a lot of it over my head. I am not too sure if I have the smarts to get into it, but I'm glad there are smarty pantsers out there just like you, James, who have it all under control, and I'm putting all of my chips in your hands to protect them, or whatever the saying goes when it comes to cybersecurity. So thank you for running me through it.
Anytime. I hope that somebody found something useful in this rant.
And the hunt continues. If you have any ideas of who I should interview next, get in touch with me. You can DM me through the Instagram, WEK Podcast. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of those chats. Contribute and get involved, workexperiencekid.com.